Well, hello Quilty friends. Welcome back to my sewing room. Welcome back to my channel. And today I'm excited to kick off the first block in the Scarecrow, in the How to Build a Scarecrow Sew Along. Okay, so this is made with my autumn fabric. And here's the sew along guide right here that gives you all of the cutting and everything. Of course, that's on my blog. I've already done the Be Prepared post. If you're new and this is the first time you're watching this, just read the description in this video and I will give a link to the free download of this, and you can go to my Be Prepared post, which I will leave that link for, to read all about this sew along and all about the quilt. So this is what the quilt looks like. It's called How to Build a Scarecrow. It's 74 by 87. And all of these blocks, which I've already done the tutorial for here on my channel, are pieced, machine pieced, surrounding all of these applique blocks within here, except for this hay bale is also going to be machine pieced. And so we're using my Sew Simple shapes to do the appliques, just like I do with my sew along quilts. And I've got my shapes, you know, I keep them in here. But I did pull out the ones that we're using for this block right here. That tells you everything in the guide, all of the cutting, but I did want to just talk to you a little bit about, you know, maybe some of the tracing and things like that. So let me set that up there. I'll talk about these for the legs. Oh, I forgot to show you. Here's what the block is that we're making. Okay, so what we're doing is cutting these strips of fabric and using the bias tape maker to make 1/4 inch strips for these legs. And when we go to lay out the block, I'll show you how to do those. But so let me set those up there. What I wanted to talk to you about right now, so let me grab this, is tracing. So you can see that, okay, I don't want to dump that on the floor. Okay, hang on, here we go. All right, so you can see that this is a really long piece of fabric and interfacing, right, that you need to trace with this, but this is the halfway mark. So I just wanted to tell you to go ahead and cut it the size that it tells you to cut it in the guide, the fabric and the sewing interfacing. And then what I do is I just folded it in half and traced right there. Okay, and then I just flipped it over and traced the other side. Okay, and that's so that we didn't have to do a Sew Simple shape, you know, super long like that. Okay, so that's how you do that one. The other ones are just self-explanatory. They're just, you just lay them on there and trace. You can cut all your fabric pieces that you have in the guide just exactly like they say, or you can just simply take the interfacing, take your shapes, trace them on there, cut around with enough space around it, lay it on your fabric, and cut that way too. I mean, there's, you know, there's several ways to do things. Whatever's your favorite way is the best. Now, what I wanted to say about this is you can see that we have the two crows facing each other. And so the shape right here would be traced. Whenever you trace the shape, that's how it's going to end up being, because you're tracing it on you're not doing it in reverse, let's put it that way. Okay, so here's R47, so that's how it's face up. But because I do want a bird in reverse, then you are going to take one and trace it like this. So this one I traced this way, which is the numbers down, and that's how you can tell that it's in reverse. Okay, all the wording is down. Also, before you sew this to this, you're going to want to sew your little 1.5 inch square that the guide tells you to cut. You can just sew it right up here, or you can just go ahead and cut it 1.5 inch wide and sew it the whole width of the strip. I just went ahead and cut a 1.5 inch strip and sewed it on both of the pieces right here. And then I press the seams open, okay? And then when you go to sew this, and this is the one I'm going to show you how to sew, is you want to place that line right there. And how I got that line was when I traced that bird, I just took my pencil right here and I just marked right above that line, right below that line. And then after after I traced around it, I just took a straight edge right here. You can take a ruler and I just joined it right here so that I would have a line right there to show me where to sew. And that way it's easier. Of course, we don't want to do a shape that tiny. We couldn't do a shape that tiny. And I just think that it's a lot easier in a lot of different instances to sew beforehand. And if you followed my sew alongs before, you know that that's how I do things quite a bit. And so I will always tell you on my blog during each tutorial of each block, if there's piecing beforehand, you know, if you need to piece two fabrics together. And, you know, there's a little bit of that in this quilt. And I just showed you how to do that, so that's not a big deal. And so then what I do is just grab a couple of pins and I'll lay that right there on that line and just pin in a couple of places so that it's not gonna shift. Sometimes I don't pin. I don't need to. This sewing interfacing really kind of, you know, holds to the fabric nicely when you're sewing, but I want to make sure that this is straight, and so I went ahead and pinned that. Now when you're sewing, you may want to do like a little bit of a smaller stitch. When I sew on my featherweights, this is Sweet Baby James, by the way, then I usually will sew when I'm piecing blocks about a 12, but I will go up a little bit between that 12 and 20. Okay, so that's, I mean, this is telling you how many stitches per inch. And so if I'm going up 12, I mean, I might be doing like 14 or 16. I don't want to do it too tight, but I don't want to do it too loose either. But if I'm doing it tight, I'm just making sure that I'm getting it nice and stitched down good so that, you know, no seams will come open. I'm using RFL thread, good thread, and so I'm not really worried about it and not really had a problem, but that's just what I do. And so when I start to sew, I will sew into, just like this. Let me put on my readers so I can see. And I will sew to the line, and then I'll just go ahead and I'm sewing right on the line right here. But notice I'm not back stitching, and this is how I do all of my Sew Simple shapes. And I'm just sewing on the line. It's just very easy, and I just go slow or fast when needed. And you can see that I'm just lifting up the presser foot just when I'm turning. I go a little bit slower on the curves, just like when you're driving. And then when you get to a straight part, you can go a little bit faster. And I'm just using an open toe foot. And this is the one that comes with the featherweight. You know, these are all vintage machines, but this is the original foot that came with it. Whatever machine you're using, I do suggest using some kind of an open toe foot so that basically you can see exactly where the needle is going in so that you're not guessing. If you're sewing on the line, once that trace line goes under your presser foot, you want to be able to see it no matter what. And then I'm just sewing all the way. When I get to the point, I just sew to a point, turn, and whatever I sew is going to be the shape that it ends up being. So if I'm sewing right on the line, then that's what it's going to happen. So now as I'm coming to the end, I'm just going to over sew right off the edge, and that's all the back stitching that I need to do. Okay, and I don't need to worry about any of that. And then I just take out the pins, and I'll do that in a minute and show you how I trim, but I'm just sewing the same way with all of these pieces. Okay, and I'm just going to use a little scrap of fabric to save thread here in between. And then I like to trim past my sewing line, I don't know, about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit smaller. I don't want my seams too bulky. When I get to the points here, I can cut in like that just to make it a little less pointy, meaning I wouldn't, this is what I would not do, is this. I would cut that off, but not right to the point. Hope that made sense. Okay. Then I just continue trimming around. At this point, when you're trimming, you can see if you missed sewing on a line. Sometimes, you know, when I'm doing this tutorial, I have to sew farther away than I normally do. I normally am getting right up close and personal to my machine and see exactly where I'm going in. But at this point, sometimes when you're trimming, you can see maybe if you missed a line. I went a little above there, but that's not going to bother me at all. That's not going to matter. It's just a little bit of a curve. And before you turn, this is where you'd want to fix it. You wouldn't necessarily have to unpick this if you didn't want to, because it's in the seam allowance, but you could just simply go like this. I mean, I could just hurry and fix it now and just sew on the line. And then just sew off of it. That's what I would do. Let's see, I don't want to use those great big scissors to clip that. I like to use these big scissors to trim the seam allowance, and then I like to use these smaller scissors for clipping my inner curves. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about next. Is we've got inner curves here, and that's why I chose this piece to show you, so that this has cleavage areas right here, and it has a couple of inner curves. And so what you're going to do is, I know this is scary, but you're going to clip right to that thread, not into it. You want to still keep that thread intact, but you're going to clip right to it. And then on the inner curve, you're going to do the same thing, but not real close together because it's not a really curvy inner curve. But that's going to be enough right there. And then once again, you're going to clip to that. And then you've got just a slight inner curve here and a slight one here. And so I'm just going to clip that a couple of times there. And I like to do one snip, use some really nice little sharp scissors there and snip to the line. And then that's all you need to do there. And then I like to, you can either pull this apart right here so that you're not snipping your fabric and do a little cut there. Or you can just take your seam ripper right there and just fill on the other side and make sure that you're not, you know, poking through, and just do a little start that way. And then I'll usually do like an X or a T, something like that. For this shape, I just want to make sure that I can turn that, you know, so that's large enough for me. I don't like to go all the way to the edges or anything like that. I don't want to just distort my shapes. And then I just simply turn like this. Okay. Now let me stick my mat up here. And then this is where the point-to-point turner really comes in handy, and I also use that to shape. And so this is kind of, I just use my fingers to kind of push out what I can, and then I put the interfacing towards me, and I just use this to push on the fabric. I'm not pushing on the interfacing at all. I'm just pushing on the fabric a little bit. And when I say pushing, I mean barely and just a little bit. I'm just trying to push this fabric out and shape it. Now I wanted to show you this because I wanted to show you how to do points. See how I turn that sideways? And I take advantage of those seam allowances in there, and I just, using the tip of this, I'm just gently pushing that out and kind of holding it with my fingers, supporting it so that I'm not, you know, jabbing a big hole in there. Okay, there's that point, and then I'm going to do the same thing, just kind of push on that fabric, kind of rolling it out using this clover point-to-point turner. Now I'm doing it sideways again, and I'm pushing on the seam allowance. I'm not pushing on a single, what do I want to say, the single piece of fabric or the interfacing. I'm pushing on that seam allowance, taking advantage of it to kind of push out so that I won't poke a hole if I'm just pushing through that single layer of fabric. Okay, so that's what that looks like. So I've got that shaped, and then I'm just kind of turning around, pushing that out a little bit, and then I've got the beak to do, and it's going to be the same way. You've got your seam allowance in there, and I press that seam open from when I sewed these two pieces together to allow it to lie flat. Now I've got that pushed out. And, you know, you can roll edges however you need to do it. And I like to just kind of take one section at a time and just kind of roll that You know, cotton has a memory. This is 100% cotton. And so if you just kind of roll the edges like this, then that is going to make sure, or ensure, I should say, that that is going to be nice and flat. And then I just simply lay my iron on there. I try not to iron it. It's not going to hurt it if you iron back and forth a little bit, but you really just try to press. And then I'll take the clappers here and just lay right on there and use the heat of that. Move these so that the iron doesn't accidentally touch those. And these are not heat resistant, by the way. So we don't, you know, we don't need them to be for the method that I use. And so then I just let that cool. And I've got my little shape there. And I just make sure that this is flat and not folded under or something like that, so that I can ensure that all my pieces are nice and flat when I go to lay them out on the background. So I'm going to go ahead and continue sewing these shapes, turning them and pressing them, and then I'll move my Sweet Baby James machine and I will lay out the block here on the table and show you how I do that. And I'll show you how to do the legs at that time too. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, before I cleared everything out, I decided I better just go ahead and show you how I do this first. And so here I've got my 5/8 inch wide strip, and I've not cut it on the bias. I've just cut it straight across that fat quarter that's called for in this print. And you know, I did one to show you already, but here's one that's not done. And what I do is I simply, on one end, I'm going to cut a little point there. And then I take the 1/4 inch bias tape maker. I use Clovers. This is the 1/4 inch, that color right there. And then I lay it on my ironing board, and then I just grab a spray bottle that has like some water and half starch in it. And that's what I press all my fabric with. When I starch, this is half starch, half water, and I use Mary Ellen's Best Press. And sometimes, you know, if you want to have a little bit heavier starch, you can put more starch to the mixture, but I usually use about half and half, but I don't measure exactly. Whatever spray bottle I'm using, or, you know, spritzer or whatever, I just pour in half and eyeball it. And anyway, so then I spray that, and that tip that I cut, I want to make that dry, okay, before I run it through here. And because there's some starch in it, see, it's stiffer there, it's going to be easier to start. Okay, so what I do is I just push that in there. You can grab the tip of a scissors, your seam ripper, whatever, and push that point out. Then I like to have this down here. I don't use that really, but I don't want it to drag this way. So I like to have it like that. And I just start on this end right here. And I just try to keep things nice and straight across this way. And I'm just pressing as I go along. And I try not to have too much of a gap between the iron and the bias tape maker, but I do not want to touch them because my iron is very hot. Yes, I do use vintage irons. They get very hot. And if I am touching this as I go along, I'm going to be transferring heat to here. And yes, I've done that before on accident. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, you burn your fingers. And so I do, you know, do it a little bit slowly just so that I'm drying the fabric as I go along and pressing it and drying it at the same time so that it will keep its shape. Now this is just a straight piece, like I said, of bias tape, a bias, but it's not really cut on the bias, but we're calling it bias because we're using the bias tape maker. But in the package directions, it tells you to hold it like this, but where the folds end up that way. But I like to press from the top because then I don't get that little crease. I can use the weight of my iron and the point of my iron to go along like that. And then you can just see that it's folded underneath there, see? And it's gonna keep it nice and flat. And then we're just gonna cut those to whatever length we need. Now, if we don't need this to be on the bias is what I've started to say, but if we do need it on the bias and we cut it on the bias, when I'm pressing it, I simply, instead of pulling this straight, I am turning like this, so that when I press, I'm turning, pressing a curve in there. And that's for like flower stems or anything like that that I do use for any of my other sew-alongs, or if it happens to be just a strip that you need to be curved, then I will go ahead and press a curve in it, and then it will be easier when I'm pinning it on the board to actually pin it into a curve. Okay, so that's the information about that. Now I'm going to clear everything up so that I can show you how to lay out this cute block. Okay, so I've got everything shaped here, just turned and shaped just like this. This shape was the same. It's just got these cleavage areas right here, these 5 that you just clipped. This one you didn't have to clip before turning, and the wings you didn't have to clip before turning. And so I'm just going to mimic this one right here. And so my background, I always have you cut the background like an inch bigger all the way around, or so it's a 1/2 inch bigger all the way around, but approximately at least an inch bigger, so that when you're appliquing, after, edges frayed, whatever, whatever you do, then you square it up and trim it up after, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But so this one is a block that I can press in half to use my halfway point. Some of them, wouldn't work that way, meaning, well, the stars and the moon one it isn't centered. In fact, let me show you that real quick. I'll put that here so I can show you. So this will be on the blog. So I took pictures of this block, and because this is one of this week's blocks as well. And I took pictures along the way, so I have the step-by-step tutorial for this. But you can see what I mean. I didn't press this in half this way or this way because there really wasn't a halfway point, but I will talk about all those measurements on that on the blog. But anytime there's a block that's symmetrical like this, I would have you press the background in half, this one in half, this one not because it's not symmetrical, this one yes. Anyway, I'm hoping you understand what I'm saying. And so this one is going to be pressed in half, and because I want to get this centered, then I don't need to press it in half, but I want to fold it in half and bring it up, I don't know, an inch or so, 1.5 inches. Let's see what I did there. 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches from the edge, just so that I know I've got it centered. I don't have to have it exactly centered because we will trim this off, and that's where the trim it rulers come in. But I just want to, get to that point to start a base right here. And then I'm just going to make sure this is smooth underneath, meaning I don't want this overlapped right there, so that it will lie flat. Okay, so I just have 3 pins in there to hold it in place, and that's why I always use design board so that I can pin directly into it. And then I'm going to, I cut like these 3 inches long, that's plenty long. And I'm going to kind of place my birds first before I put the legs, but I know that I want my legs 1.5 inches tall, okay? So this is where this little ruler comes in handy. You just kind of put that there, or maybe I'll do it in the middle so I can test with both birds. And just this beak right here is going to be an approximate 1/4 inch in from the seam. So it looks like if that's straight, that corner piece is about where it should be. So I'm going to make sure this ruler is straight so that I'm doing the bird straight on that. It's just kind of all about spacing and just starting at a starting point. And then already went ahead and just glued those the wings on with the Sue glue. Just put a couple drops there just so that they were in place. Sometimes I like to do that. If things go on top of something, I'll just glue it ahead of time. Okay, so I'll glue that like that, and those look pretty centered to me. And then I know that this right here, the wing is, I don't know, let me go from this point. Yeah, the wing goes in just a little bit, like almost a 1/4 inch on both sides. And so I just want to kind of see if that's what I've done here. I have, see, this is straight across here. Always use my ruler as straight lines. And let me just do that here to make sure. Just see if I can catch anything if it's going off. That's about right. All right, and you know, none of this is meant to be perfection, but you just do the best you can, right? So you're gonna tuck these raw edges under there, and you want these legs to go, you know, even with this, where his little legs are coming out. And so usually at this point, I'll start there. And I'll show you why I'm doing this. Okay, and then I'll just pin right there. And I've pinned right into the leg there, so it's not moving anywhere. Yeah. And then I'll just simply do a very small amount of glue. You just don't need a lot at all, just to barely hold that into place. And then I can tuck those under. You don't even have to have them that long. You can trim them if you want, but they're fine underneath there. There's a little thread coming off there. And then I just make sure they're straight. And Cass will tell me if they're crooked, right?
Yes, I'll try.
She has a bird's eye view, haha. Okay. Okay, so those are glued down, and then I'm going to do the same thing here. Just going to tuck about, oops, I'm going to put the right side out though. Stick a pin in there. And then I can just run a little bit of glue. You can put it directly on the leg, but I find it easier to just put a little bit on the background there. And then just lift that up. Okay, so that's lined up, that's pinned in, this is pinned in, and now because that's tucked under, I can go ahead and I like to be a 1/4 inch away so that I don't have to needle that glue, whether I'm machine appliquing or hand appliquing. You can needle through it, but it's just easier if you don't have to. And so I'll just go along here, and I'm just putting a little dot as I go along, and then I'll put a pin in to let it dry. You can put it on the background or on the strip. Let's pull this in. So I will leave a link to my video on how I hand applique and machine applique my simple shapes, so you can just decide how you would like to do it. You just want to match the thread with the appliques. Make sure I've got a dot there. And not the background. And so you can just, but if you're a machine appliquing, you can simply keep the bobbin in, like an off-white color or white, whatever you're using to piece with, and then just change the top bobbin thread, because that's just going to show at the top. And I use a tiny little zigzag stitch for mine when I machine applique, or you could just do a top straight stitch just going inside if you wanted to. Or you could do the traditional needle turn applique stitch. You just don't have to turn the edges under with the needle. They're already turned under, so, which makes it very simple for layout, which is why I do this method and came up with this method, so that you can see exactly where you're laying out things. Okay, so now that's pinned in, the legs are pinned in, and I know that's where that's going to go, so I'm just going to simply use the center line for the star and line that up right there, and, you know, bring it where you think it looks good between those crows. It doesn't matter. It's, I don't know, it looks like it's about a 1/2 inch or something above there. And then I'll just put 2 pins here, leaving the edges open so that I can go ahead and glue those down. I'm not going to go ahead and do that whole thing because I think you know how that goes. And then I'm just going to do the same thing for this. I'll go ahead and do one one crow, and that was kind of a lot of glue. I didn't mean to squeeze it out that far, but you really don't need a lot. You're just holding it down. This glue is something that just takes the place of pins. I used to use pins when I would do my hand applique, and then I'm always poking my fingers because I like to scrunch up my blocks, and I was always trying to avoid the pins. And so when Sue came out with this glue, it's kind of a temporary glue. It is water soluble. I like it because it just takes the place of a pin. It holds my fabric in place, but I can peel off my fabric if I need to. If I need to reposition it, you can just gently peel it off and it can be repositioned. It's not a permanent glue. It's not super duper stiff. I like it. I just really enjoy working with it. And so once I just put more pins in around the edges just to make sure that's, you know, meeting the background where I've glued it. And that's all I do. And then I measure along the way, which I didn't do with this because I had measured this, but I know that it's going to finish. We're going to trim it down. It's going to finish at 8 inches tall. So I just want to make sure that my tallest points, which is the tip of this wing right here, to the bottom of this grass, does not go past 8 inches. And it's not even quite 7.5. So it looks like it's 7 1/4. So that'll be fine. Usually I have my trim it rulers with me to, you know, line things up like this, because this is the 8.5 inch trim it ruler. And so I just want to make sure that within this window, I can see that I'm not going to be cutting anything off. In fact, let me pull this over because now I've got pins in that, so I can't show you. So I can lay this down. So I know it's going to be 8 inches tall. And so when I go to trim up, I will use this ruler after I've appliqued. You can see that I'm going to be trimming this much stuff off. And this is the finished size. So I can say, okay, I want 1/4 inch of my background to show. So I'm going to lay that there on this inside 1/4 inch because this is where the machine will be. And I have all of this plenty of room. Because it's not a square block, then I use my 8.5 inch trim it ruler to trim it height-wise this way. And then the 18.5, after I've trimmed it from top and bottom, then I'll lay this on here and use this center line. This is the 18.5, and go ahead and, you know, trim off the sides this way. And it helps when you're trimming, so you can use all of the lines on this ruler to trim everything straight. So, you know, I wouldn't want to go like that and trim because then my grass is going to be crooked, or, you know, things like that. It just helps to keep everything straight. And I usually show you a picture of each block with the trim it ruler on top of it in my tutorials on my blog, so that you can see where things are placed. You can see these are 1/2 inch increments, and so you can see, you know, kind of, it gives you a measuring point of how far apart things are and things like that. Okay, so that's how you trim up the blocks. If they're square blocks in the quilt, then you can just go ahead and use that size trim it ruler to trim them up. But if they're rectangle, I use the two sizes, the height and the width. Okay, and so let's see, we talked about applique, and so I would just do matching thread. I know that this is gold and this is gold and this is brown, so I would just start here and machine applique all the way around there if you were doing machine applique, and the same thing with hand applique. Now, if I'm hand appliquing around here, if you're machine appliquing, let's talk about this first. If you're machine appliquing, of course you're going to go through all layers because you're going through the machine. If I'm hand appliquing, I don't need to go through clear to the back when I'm appliquing this wing to this body. I don't need to. I just need to applique to this piece of fabric. I keep my interfacing in. I do not trim it out. It's thin, but it's strong, and I like the stability that it adds to the blocks, and I like the effect of how this applique looks. I don't want my applique to sink into the fabric. I like my applique to look like it's been appliqued and not like it's just printed onto the fabric. I've done all this work for applique, or you may call it play, but I want it to look like, you know, what I've done, and not something else. It's actually fabric that's applied to the top of another piece of fabric. All right, okay, I think we've talked about this block, and that's how all of these blocks are done. And same way, you just trim, sew, trace, everything the same way. I will be talking about every Monday on my blog. I'll be doing several tutorials for these blocks. And you don't have to go at that speed. You can do as fast or as slow as you want. The tutorials will remain on my blog always. You can come to this video here on my channel to get the links to this sew along. If you have decided to start this sew along and I'm already like 2 sew alongs past, then this isn't going to be current on my blog because I already have the current one on my blog. That doesn't mean it's not still there. So you can search it, or you can come back to this video and hit the sew along and it will take you directly there. Okay, so I hope that I've answered your questions. If you have any others, just shoot me a question. Please take advantage of the tutorials every Monday, along with the sew along guide, and also please take advantage of the description in this video where I do leave links and a lot of information. So make sure that you hit the read more button or whatever it says on your device, that you can unfold the whole description of this video and read everything that you need to read. And so thank you so much for joining me. And if you didn't see my last video when I did these block tutorials, obviously I talked about that I'm sewing in a new space because we moved into a new house. So I explained that there in that last tutorial. But I think since Cass is here, I think I'll have her film like a little bit here in this sewing loft area where my sewing machine is and show you a little peek of this area of my sewing space. And so thank you so much for joining me, and I will chat with you later.